For more than 53 years, no human being traveled beyond low Earth orbit. Not once. The longest gap in exploration since humans first figured out how to explore. 53 years of staying close to home, circling the planet in space stations, doing important work, but never going further. Never pushing past that invisible boundary where Earth's protection ends and the deep, dangerous universe begins. That changed on April 1, 2025, when a rocket carrying 4 astronauts lifted off from Florida and aimed itself at the moon. Their names are Reed Wiseman, Victor Glover, Christina Koch, and Jeremy Hansen. They are the Artemis II crew. And what they are experiencing on this journey is something no human being has ever experienced before, not in the way they are experiencing it, not with the tools they carry, and not with the knowledge they bring. This is not a repeat of the Apollo missions. It is not a sequel. It is something entirely new. To understand how different this is, you have to first understand what the Apollo astronauts actually went through. Because the gap between then and now is not just about better computers or faster rockets. It is about the basic human experience of being in space. The Apollo missions were remarkable. The people who flew them were extraordinarily brave. But the conditions they lived and worked in were, by any honest measure, extremely difficult in ways that had nothing to do with the danger of space itself. They were difficult because of simple, everyday things that we now take for granted. Start with space. The Apollo Command Module gave its 3-person crew about 210 cubic feet of space to live in. That is roughly the size of a large closet. 3 grown adults, sealed inside a closet, for up to 14 days. They could not stand up straight. They could not stretch their arms out fully in any direction without touching a wall or another person. Every task they performed, eating, sleeping, working, going to the bathroom, had to be done in that tight, shared space. It was not just uncomfortable. It changed how they moved, how they rested, and how they recovered. The Artemis II crew has 330 cubic feet in the Orion spacecraft. That is nearly 60% more room. Roughly the interior space of 2 minivans parked side by side with all the seats removed. It is still not large. By any normal standard, it is still a cramped place to spend 10 days. But the difference between a closet and 2 minivans matters enormously when you are 250,000 miles from the nearest hospital. It matters when you need to change a piece of equipment, or treat a small injury, or simply get out of another person's way. Space, it turns out, is not just a comfort issue. It is a safety issue, a health issue, and a psychological issue all at once. Then there is the bathroom. This is the part of space travel that does not get discussed much, but every Apollo astronaut who has spoken honestly about their missions brings it up. The Apollo crews had no toilet. They used plastic adhesive bags they taped directly to their bodies, used in front of their crewmates, sealed, and then stored inside the cabin with them for the rest of the mission. There was no privacy. There was no dignity. There was no way around it. Nearly every Apollo astronaut who has talked about this experience describes it as one of the worst parts of space travel. Not the danger. Not the isolation. The bathroom. The Artemis II crew has a toilet. It is called the Universal Waste Management System, and it is nearly identical to the one used on the International Space Station. It collects waste separately, processes it hygienically, and it does something the Apollo crews never had: it has a door that closes. It offers privacy. It offers basic human dignity. This might sound like a small thing when you are talking about going to the moon. It is not small. It is one of the most meaningful differences in daily life that separates the 2 eras of space travel. The Artemis II crew will never know the particular discomfort that every single Apollo astronaut had to accept as part of the job. And that alone, just that one change, represents 53 years of learning what human beings actually need in space. Exercise is another thing the Artemis II crew experiences that Apollo astronauts simply did not. The Apollo crews did not exercise in space. There was no room. There was no equipment. NASA decided at the time that on missions lasting less than 2 weeks, the muscle and bone loss that comes from living in zero gravity was acceptable. The astronauts would weaken during the mission and recover afterward. And many of them did recover. But some came home struggling to walk. Some had to be carried from the capsule. The human body, it turns out, breaks down faster in zero gravity than anyone predicted, and the damage is real. The Artemis II crew exercises every single day of the mission, except on launch and landing days. 30 minutes each day, using a device called a flywheel. It weighs about 30 pounds. It fits in roughly the same space as a carry-on suitcase. It works through a cable and resistance mechanism. The harder you pull, the more resistance you get, up to 400 pounds of force. You can row on it. You can do squats. You can do deadlifts. In zero gravity, on your way to the moon, you can do deadlifts. This would have sounded like a joke to any engineer working on Apollo in 1969. But it is real, and it matters, because it means the Artemis II crew will return to Earth significantly stronger and healthier than the Apollo crews did. Their muscles will not have wasted away. Their bones will not have weakened as severely. They will walk off the spacecraft on their own. The power supply of the Orion spacecraft is another experience that is fundamentally different from Apollo. The Apollo command module ran entirely on fuel cells, hydrogen and oxygen combined to produce electricity, with water as a useful side product. It was elegant engineering. But it was finite. Every watt of power the crew used came from a tank that was slowly emptying. The crew always knew this. They were always aware of the clock ticking down on their consumables. Every system they ran, every light they left on, every piece of equipment they operated was drawing from a supply that would eventually run out. That awareness lives in the background of every decision on a mission like that. It is a low, constant pressure that never fully goes away. Orion deploys 4 solar array wings after reaching space. These wings are covered in photovoltaic cells that convert sunlight into electricity continuously. For all practical purposes, the electrical power supply is unlimited as long as the sun is shining. The Artemis II crew does not live under that same background pressure about power. They can run their systems longer. They can use equipment more freely. The spacecraft can operate with more redundancy, more backup systems, more margin. This changes the psychology of the mission in a way that is hard to see from the outside but is felt constantly by the crew inside. The computers on Orion are roughly 20,000 times faster than the computers on Apollo. 20,000 times. Apollo's guidance computer had about 72 kilobytes of memory and could execute around 40,000 instructions per second. A basic modern calculator is more powerful. Orion runs 4 independent computers in parallel. The cockpit is entirely digital, with glass screens and software interfaces that update in real time. The spacecraft can fly itself. It proved this during the uncrewed Artemis I mission in 2022, when it completed an entire lunar mission autonomously, without a single human on board. This matters for the Artemis II crew in a specific and practical way. The crew has been performing manual piloting demonstrations, physically flying the spacecraft through open space, testing different steering modes, learning how the vehicle handles under human control. Apollo astronauts flew manually during docking and during the lunar landing approach. But they never flew the command module through deep space the way the Artemis II crew is doing right now. Orion is being designed for a future where astronauts may be so far from Earth that communication delays make ground control useless in an emergency. Up to 20 minutes each way to Mars. You cannot wait 40 minutes for an answer when something is going wrong. The crew has to be able to fly the spacecraft themselves, and they are proving right now that they can. Communication itself is entirely different. Apollo talked to Earth using radio waves, the same basic technology as an AM radio station, just aimed at the moon. It worked. The voice was scratchy and the bandwidth was narrow. Transmitting a single photograph could take minutes. Orion's primary communication system for high-speed data transfer uses laser light. Infrared laser beams carry information back to Earth at rates that would have seemed impossible to the engineers of 1972. By the fourth day of the Artemis II mission, the crew had already sent back 100 gigabytes of data, including high-resolution photographs taken through Orion's windows. Apollo's total data return from an entire mission measured in megabytes. The Artemis II crew is streaming detailed imagery from deep space in something close to real time. Then there is what the crew can actually see. Every Apollo mission that reached the Moon flew approximately 70 miles above the lunar surface. Close enough to see individual craters. Close enough to watch the line between day and night crawl across the terrain below them. That kind of closeness has its own power and its own beauty. But the Artemis II trajectory is different. At its closest approach, the Orion spacecraft will be about 4,600 miles from the lunar surface. At that distance, the entire Moon fits in the window. Not a portion of it. Not a strip of terrain. The whole disk, from pole to pole, hanging in the black. No Apollo astronaut ever had that view at their closest approach to the Moon. They were always too close, seeing only a small section at any given moment. The Artemis II crew will see the entire Moon the way you see the Earth from an airplane, as a complete, whole object, existing independently in space. That is a different experience of the Moon. It is not better or worse than seeing it up close. It is simply a view that no human being has ever had before at that particular moment in a lunar mission. And because of the specific geometry of the Artemis II trajectory, the crew will see something that no human has ever seen directly with their own eyes, the Oriental Basin. This is a massive ancient impact crater on the transition zone between the near side and the far side of the Moon. It is roughly 600 miles across. Robotic spacecraft have photographed it. Orbital instruments have mapped every detail of its surface. But no person has ever looked at it directly. The Apollo missions were planned so that the near side of the Moon was illuminated during their flybys, which meant the Oriental Basin region was always in shadow or out of view. The Artemis II trajectory changed that. The crew has already photographed it through Orion's windows, and for the first time in human history, a person looked at a feature of another world and saw something that only machines had seen before them. There is also a solar eclipse coming, one that no Apollo crew ever experienced. Not the kind seen from Earth, where the Moon slides in front of the Sun. This one happens from the other direction. As the Artemis II spacecraft passes behind the Moon, the Earth will move between the spacecraft and the Sun. For approximately 53 minutes, the crew will watch their home planet, glowing blue and white, thin as a crescent, slowly block the light of the Sun. The geometry of this eclipse was not designed into the mission. The physics of the flyby made it happen naturally, as an inevitable result of the trajectory chosen. No Apollo crew ever saw the Earth eclipse the Sun from behind the Moon. The alignment never worked out that way. For the Artemis II crew, it is simply part of what this particular journey brings. The crew itself represents something that Apollo never did, and this matters as an experience in a way that goes beyond statistics. Victor Glover is the first person of color to travel beyond low Earth orbit. Christina Koch is the first woman. Jeremy Hansen is the first non-American citizen to travel this far from Earth. He is Canadian, selected as part of a 2020 treaty between the United States and Canada formalizing Canadian participation in the Artemis program. The Apollo program was exclusively American, exclusively white, and exclusively male. Not because of any single decision, but because the pipeline that produced military test pilots in the 1960s was itself built on exclusion. The Artemis II crew does not fix that history. But it does mean that the first humans to travel toward the Moon in more than 50 years carry a different story with them, and they look more like the full range of humanity they represent. The radiation experience is also different, and more deeply studied. When the Artemis II crew passed through the Van Allen belts, the bands of intense radiation trapped around Earth by its magnetic field, they carried radiation monitors that record exposure in detail never previously attempted on a crewed mission. The International Space Station stays safely below those belts. Every crewed mission since Apollo 17 in 1972 has stayed below them. The Artemis II crew punched through both belts on the way out, as the Apollo crews did, and will punch through them again on the way home. Some Apollo astronauts reported flashes of light in their closed eyes during the mission, cosmic rays striking their retinas directly. We understand that phenomenon better now. The data collected on this mission, measuring exactly how the crew's bodies respond to deep space radiation, will shape crew selection, mission planning, and spacecraft shielding for every deep space mission that follows. And at the end of all of it, the Artemis II crew will face something no human has ever survived at this speed: re-entry. When Orion hits Earth's atmosphere on the way home, it will be traveling at approximately 25,000 miles per hour. Faster than any crewed spacecraft has ever traveled during re-entry. Faster than Apollo, faster than the Space Shuttle, faster than anything that has ever carried human beings back to Earth. The heat shield will face temperatures approaching 5,000 degrees Fahrenheit. Plasma will wrap around the vehicle. All communication will cut off. For those minutes, the crew will be completely alone, unable to speak to ground control, unable to receive data, unable to do anything except trust the engineering and wait. That silence before splashdown is perhaps the one experience that connects them most directly to the Apollo crews. The void does not change. The waiting does not change. The trust required does not change. The Artemis II crew will splash down in the Pacific Ocean around April 11. Recovery ships will be waiting. Divers will approach the bobbing capsule, open the hatch, and help 4 people climb out into sunlight and ocean air. Those 4 people will have traveled farther from Earth than any human beings who came before them, approximately 252,757 miles, breaking the distance record set involuntarily by the Apollo 13 crew during their emergency in 1970. They will have tested every major system that future crews will depend on to actually land on the moon. They will have seen things that no human eyes have ever seen. The Apollo astronauts came home as conquerors. They had been sent to reach the moon, and they reached it. The Artemis II crew comes home as something different, as people who went first so that others could go further. Everything they tested, everything they photographed, everything their bodies recorded and endured, all of it feeds into what comes next. The landing on the moon's south pole. The permanent outpost in lunar orbit. Eventually, the journey to Mars. Apollo proved that humans could leave. Artemis is figuring out how to stay gone. And right now, 4 people are making that possible, floating in a spacecraft that is smarter, better equipped, and more capable than anything Apollo ever flew, doing things that no human has ever done, seeing things no human has ever seen, experiencing a journey that belongs entirely to them and to this moment in history. That is what the Artemis II crew will experience that Apollo astronauts never did. Almost everything. And the only thing that stays the same, the silence behind the moon, the 40 minutes of no signal, the darkness and the distance and the ancient irreducible fact of being very small and very far from home, is the same because space itself has not changed. Only we have.